It bears an image on it, ventral, front, and back dorsal, of a human figure.
Deep inside a climate-controlled server room, a supercomputer is doing something it's never done before. It's scanning a 14-foot strip of ancient linen, fiber by fiber. The machine is running millions of calculations, looking for patterns, anything that doesn't make sense. Then it stops. The algorithm freezes on something. It found a signal, not random noise, not chaos, a signal that repeats. Perfect mathematical symmetry locked inside the threads. The computer flags it as impossible because whatever created this image didn't use paint, didn't use ink, didn't use any method humans have ever documented. The AI looks deeper. What it finds next makes physicists question everything they thought they understood, because the image in this cloth wasn't made by someone's hand. It was made by something else entirely. For centuries, people thought they knew the answer. A medieval artist painted this cloth. A hoax. A forgery. Case closed. But here's the problem. When scientists looked at the actual image under a microscope, it broke their theory. The image doesn't sit inside the cloth like paint does. It sits on top. We're talking about a depth of 200 nanometers. That's smaller than a grain of sand, thinner than a soap bubble, so thin that if you stacked 400 of these images on top of each other, it still wouldn't be as thick as a human hair. This matters because paint soaks in, dyes soak in, ink soaks in. Everything that comes from a brush or a hand spreads into the fibers. But this image? It stops dead on the surface. Scientists took a thread and sliced it crosswise like a microscopic pizza. The center stayed white. The image clung only to the very top layer, like a scorch mark burned onto skin. No brush strokes, no direction, no artist's hand visible anywhere. The fibers themselves were chemically altered, but not by heat, not by fire, not by anything a medieval artist had access to. The AI ran its analysis and didn't see a painting. It saw something else. It saw evidence of energy. Raw, precise, controlled energy that touched only the surface and left a mark that lasted 2,000 years. And the pattern it left behind would break physics. Here's where it gets weird. The AI didn't just find an image, it found data. The machine ran something called principal component analysis. Basically, it stripped away all the noise, all the random fiber patterns, all the visual chaos, and it looked for the core truth underneath. What emerged was impossible. The brightness and darkness of the image followed an exact mathematical rule. Not random, not artistic, not approximate. Exact. The darker parts of the image, those spots were physically closer to the cloth. The lighter parts, those were farther away. The AI mapped it and found perfect correlation. It was like the cloth had been draped over a 3D body, and the image captured the distance between every single point. A painter trying to fake this would use shading tricks, shadows to create depth. But this cloth doesn't have shadows, it has mathematics. Then the AI found something even stranger. Hidden inside the image were repeating patterns, geometric ratios, the distance between the eyes, the proportions of the hands, the curve of the ribs, all of it following an underlying blueprint, like looking at musical harmony but for your eyes. These patterns were invisible to human eyes for centuries, buried in the fabric's weave, lost in the visual static, but the machine saw them clearly. A medieval forger would have needed to be 3 people at once: a master physicist, a mathematician, a nanotechnologist painting with invisible geometry at a scale smaller than bacteria. The AI confirmed it. This image wasn't created by a hand-touching cloth. It behaves like a projection, like something 3-dimensional was projected onto a 2-dimensional surface and burned the exact distance measurements into the fibers. Scientists had a new problem. Not who painted this, but what technology created this. Because the answer didn't exist in the 1300s, it barely exists today. The AI kept digging. It analyzed the background around the body, the empty space, the parts where nothing happened. In a forgery, the background is usually blank, empty canvas, maybe painted over, maybe just ignored. But the shroud wasn't blank. The AI found something called data silence, meaning the imaging process was selective. Whatever created this image only affected the cloth where the body was present, nowhere else. Like a laser focused on a target. Precision that rules out accident, rules out random heat, rules out anything spreading or radiating outward. This is where physics starts breaking. The image has no blur, no fuzzy edges, no spreading. razor sharp at a microscopic level, like light moving in a straight line, parallel rays, perfectly aligned. We can only do that today with lasers. If you shine a flashlight at a wall, the light spreads, gets fuzzy, follows the inverse square law of physics. The Shroud image doesn't follow that law. It ignores it. The AI flagged this as a physical anomaly, which means the cloth was exposed to energy that defied basic physics. Energy that moved straight, parallel, controlled, and the machine detected one more thing. The rays were coming from above, perpendicular to gravity, moving downward only, not spreading, not radiating, not scattered. Like something inside the body released all its energy in one direction, upward. But here's the thing. The AI didn't discover this mystery. It just proved what scientists found decades ago, before computers, before machine learning, when they only had their eyes and confusion. In 1898, a lawyer named Secundo Pia took the very first photograph of the Shroud. He was in his darkroom, developing the glass plate, watching the image appear in the chemical bath. He almost dropped it, because in the negative, the inverted version, the faint blurry image on the cloth suddenly became crystal clear, a perfect portrait. Detailed, real. The image on the cloth was a photographic negative, 500 years before photography was invented. Think about that. A medieval artist would paint what they see, light and shadow as their eye perceives it. They don't invert light values. They don't paint in negative. That concept doesn't exist yet. It would be like writing a book in binary code in the year 1300. For no reason, when nobody would understand it, when it wouldn't make sense for 500 years. But then something happened in the 1970s. Scientists from the Air Force Academy got their hands on a machine called a VP-8 image analyzer. This wasn't a toy. NASA used this to map the surface of the Moon and Mars. It converts brightness into height. Darkness becomes depth. If you put a normal photograph into the VP-8, it breaks. The nose sinks into the face. The eyes bulge out. It distorts because camera shadows have nothing to do with actual depth. But when they fed the Shroud image into the machine, it didn't distort. It created a perfect three-dimensional relief of a human form. No warping, no breaks, perfect anatomy. Like someone had carved a sculpture and the image captured every curve. The scientists were stunned. The image contained real three-dimensional information. Darker spots weren't artistic shadows. They were measurements. Distance from cloth to skin. This puzzle has haunted science for 50 years. A medieval date. But technology that shouldn't exist, and now the AI had confirmed it. Not just confirmed it, refined it, stripped away the noise and showed that someone or something had encoded 3D data into cloth fibers in a way modern science still can't replicate. The question wasn't whether it was a forgery anymore. The question was how. The AI kept finding things, real things, not theories, not guesses. Actual physical evidence locked in the fibers. It enhanced the area around the eyes and found circular distortions, faint impressions, shaped like coins, specifically Roman coins, the kind minted between 29 and 36 AD, Pontius Pilate coins. Now this detail matters because a medieval forger wouldn't know to put coins over the eyes. That wasn't a common burial practice that artists would paint into a hoax. And they definitely wouldn't paint them so faint that you need 21st century computer enhancement to even see them. It's like someone knew that centuries later, machines would look for this evidence. Then the AI analyzed the blood, real human blood, type AB, coating parts of the cloth. But here's what made scientists pause. The blood is still reddish, blood oxidizes, it turns brown, then black. That's what happens over time. Basic chemistry. But this blood stayed red. The color spectrum showed high levels of bilirubin. That's a chemical the body produces under extreme torture and stress. The kind of stress from being beaten, whipped, nailed to wood. And it was there before the image formed. The AI could see it. Under the blood stains, there was no image, which means the blood soaked in first. Then the flash happened. If an artist painted this, they would have painted blood first, then painted the negative image around it without overlapping. That's technically impossible for a human hand. The painting theory didn't just fail. It collapsed completely. Every piece of physical evidence pointed to one thing. This wasn't art. This was a recording. In 1988, everything seemed solved. 3 separate labs, Oxford, Zurich, Arizona, all using the same method, radiocarbon dating. They took a sample from the shroud and counted individual carbon-14 atoms. The result came back 1260 to 1390 AD. Medieval. Fake. Done. The headline screamed it. Science had won. Mystery solved. But almost immediately, things fell apart. A chemist named Raymond Rogers looked at what was left of the sample. Under the microscope, he found something. The fibers they tested were chemically different from the main cloth. The sample threads were coated with plant gum, interwoven with cotton, dyed to match the original color. The main shroud is pure linen, no cotton anywhere. Rogers realized the truth. The labs didn't date the shroud. They dated a medieval repair patch. In 1532, the shroud survived a fire. Nuns patched the damaged areas. They used something called invisible reweaving, a technique so skilled you can't tell new thread from old with your naked eye. But under a microscope, the difference was obvious. It's like testing the age of the Great Pyramid by grabbing a coffee cup a tourist left on the steps. Of course, you're going to get a modern date. The entire 1988 result was contaminated, and scientists knew it. But the damage was done. The world believed the shroud was fake. Textbooks were written. Careers moved on. Then new technology arrived. Scientists used wide-angle X-ray scattering to examine the cellulose fibers inside the linen. Not looking at dirt, not looking at new threads, looking at how the atoms had broken down over time. The results shocked everyone. The decay-matched fabrics found in Masada, Israel, dating back to 55 to 74 AD. Another study using vibrational spectroscopy came to the same conclusion. The cloth is roughly 2,000 years old, so now scientists faced an impossible choice. Trust the contaminated 1988 test saying medieval, or trust the new advanced test saying 1st century. The AI didn't have to choose, it looked at the physics. And the physics didn't care what the carbon dating said. The physics said something happened on this cloth that science still can't explain. But the AI found something else. A second cloth, the Sudarium of Oviedo. Smaller, less famous, kept in Spain for centuries, believed to be the face cloth used immediately after death, before the body was wrapped in the shroud. This cloth had a documented history going back to the 7th century, centuries before the supposed medieval forgery date. The AI compared the bloodstains on the Sudarium with the bloodstains on the shroud. The match was perfect. Same blood type, same chemical composition. The shape of the stains aligned geometrically. If you placed the Sudarium over the shroud's face, the blood patterns locked together like puzzle pieces. Both cloths covered the same face at the same time. Think about what that means. If the Sudarium is older than the Middle Ages, then the shroud must be too. A medieval forger would have needed to know about a cloth hidden in Spain, know its exact blood pattern, know where every stain landed on a face they'd never seen, then recreate that pattern with perfect accuracy while also encoding 3D data that wouldn't be discoverable for 500 years. The forgery theory didn't just break, it shattered. Because now you're not explaining one impossible object, you're explaining two, and the second one has a documented history that predates your supposed forger by centuries. Scientists were trapped. They couldn't maintain the medieval date without dismissing all the new evidence. They couldn't accept the ancient date without confronting what that implied. And they definitely couldn't explain how a medieval artist created something that matches a cloth hidden on the other side of Europe. The AI bypassed the entire argument. It ignored the dating wars, ignored the politics, ignored what people wanted to believe. It looked at the physics, and the physics said this object behaves like a witness to an event, not a painting, a record, a crime scene, and whatever happened left evidence that shouldn't be possible. So here's the question that broke physics. How do you create a superficial 3D encoded negative image on linen without destroying the cloth? How do you burn a scorch mark that's thinner than a soap bubble? How do you encode mathematical data into fibers without any pigment, any paint, any known medium? Scientists had to go somewhere they didn't want to go. They started proposing theories that sound like science fiction. The leading explanation came from researchers who spent years trying to replicate the image. They used excimer lasers, ultraviolet light. They blasted linen fabrics with specific wavelengths and watched what happened. They found something. A very specific type of short wavelength ultraviolet light could color the linen in the exact same way as the shroud. It only colored the top layer, about 200 nanometers deep, without burning the rest. But here's the catch. To get that image on a human-sized cloth, you would need a burst of radiation equivalent to 34 trillion watts of ultraviolet light. 34 trillion watts. To put that in perspective, that's more power than any searchlight on Earth. More power than most power plants produce. It's comparable to a nuclear event, but without the heat. A pulse of energy shorter than 40 billionths of a second. If the pulse was any longer, the cloth would have vaporized. If it was any weaker, the image wouldn't have formed. It had to be perfect. Exact. Which brings us to the wildest theory the AI data actually supports. Some physicists propose something called the collapsed state theory. They suggested the body underwent a process where its mass was converted directly into energy. Einstein's equation, E equals mc squared, tells us a small amount of mass contains a huge amount of energy. If the atoms in a human body suddenly decayed or transformed, it would release a flash of radiation, the kind of flash that could scorch cloth, the kind of flash the AI detected. Another theory gaining attention is the corona discharge theory. Imagine the body becoming charged with millions of volts of electricity, creating a plasma discharge, a burst of electrostatic energy that scorched the linen in patterns only electricity could create. The AI found fractal patterns consistent with lightning strikes, branching patterns, the kind you see when electricity tears through matter. But the most mind-bending theory is the fourth-dimensional hypothesis. Some theoretical physicists looked at the AI's 3D mapping and suggested something radical. The image looks like a three-dimensional object being pushed through a two-dimensional plane, a cross-section. If a three-dimensional object passes through a two-dimensional world, it leaves a shadow, a projection. But what if a body moved into a higher dimension? The energy release might leave a shadow on our three-dimensional world. On a 2D cloth, that shadow would look exactly like the shroud. It sounds impossible, but the shroud is the only object on Earth that possesses these properties. The AI found absolutely no signs of putrefaction, no decay, no decomposition. Usually a body begins to decompose after 40 hours, releases liquid, releases ammonia, destroys the image, rots the cloth. The shroud shows none of this. The body was there long enough to form bloodstains, long enough for rigor mortis, but vanished before decomposition could start. It didn't get up and walk away. The bloodstains are pristine. The fibers aren't broken or dragged. The body disappeared from inside the cloth without disturbing the fabric. It passed through the linen, mechanically transparent matter. So let's be clear about what just happened. Scientists are facing two impossible choices. Choice 1. The shroud is a medieval forgery created by someone who possessed technology that exceeds 21st century science. A forger who had access to UV laser arrays, particle accelerators, knowledge of quantum mechanics. Someone who could encode 3D data into cloth fibers at a nanometer scale while also creating a photographic -5 centuries before photography was invented. That forger would need to be a genius beyond anything history has ever documented. Choice 2. The shroud is a record of something that happened in 1st century Jerusalem, an event that released the equivalent of a nuclear flash without heat, an event that converted human matter into energy, an event that left behind a perfect 3D map burned into cloth at a depth of 200 nanometers, an event that defies every law of physics we thought was permanent. The AI didn't solve the age debate. It made the debate irrelevant, because even if this cloth is from the Middle Ages, how did they encode 3D data? How did they create a photographic negative? How did they use nanotechnology in a castle somewhere? The machine found no brushstrokes. It found no signs of human creation. It found a signature, the signature of a flash that lasted a fraction of a second, but left a mark that survived 2,000 years. A mark so precise, so mathematically perfect, so physically impossible that science still doesn't have a name for it. Researchers at agencies around the world are still trying to replicate it. They're using modern lasers, modern technology, the best equipment humanity has built. And they can't do it. They can get close, they can color linen, they can create marks. But they can't replicate the full properties, the superficiality, the 3D encoding, the mathematical precision, the lack of heat damage. The shroud sits in a climate-controlled vault in Turin, Italy, waiting. Scientists visit, they study it, they measure it, they take samples, they run it through machines that didn't exist 10 years ago. And every time they look deeper, they find something else that shouldn't be there. AI revealed that the shroud is not just a picture. It's a document containing verified data that we're only now developing the tools to read. A message from an event we can't explain. A record of something that challenges everything we know about how reality works. And here's what might keep you awake tonight. We still don't know what happened to create this image. We know it wasn't paint. We ruled that out. We know it wasn't heat from a statue. We know it wasn't acid or chemicals or any known medium. We know something released radiation equivalent to a nuclear event without the heat. We know a body was there, and then it wasn't. We know the cloth recorded it all. But we don't know what. Scientists won't publish papers about it. Universities won't fund research. Because admitting you don't understand something this fundamental means admitting the textbooks might be wrong. The equations might be incomplete. Reality might work in ways we haven't discovered yet. The shroud is still waiting in that vault, and the AI is still looking. Because somewhere in those fibers is an answer that could change everything. We just haven't found it yet.